First of all, I'd like to thank Rich for bringing us together. I mean, this really is special. I told Rhonda, my better half, that I was looking forward, first and foremost, to be a listener. And the morning was already just so fantastically rich. I feel totally blessed. And I should also just honor the fact that of all places we are here in the Renaissance room of a Presbyterian church. Now, why is that meaningful? Well, I have to be a synchronicity watcher, and I honor synchronicities when they occur, particularly meaningful ones. And I think part of the reason that they continue to occur so frequently in my life is because I do honor them. I honor them right on the spot. So I have to share the following. And some of you even know that because we've shared with a few people. Rhonda and I have seen a movie multiple times, which was panned by 80+% of the reviewers, which we adored, and a good 10% of people also adore. It's a movie called The Lone Ranger. I don't know, have any of you actually seen it? Most people haven't. Paul. And Paul confirmed after that, you said it was actually one of the best movies that you've ever seen.
Loved it.
He loved it, and he made a really extraordinary comment. And he's a film guy. So Rhonda and I felt that we weren't the only crazy ones. And we had all kinds of synchronicities attached to this movie, which would be the whole conversation about to do this. But one thing that's very meaningful is that very early on, and Ken will appreciate this, the movie starts with a train, and then there's a catastrophic train accident that occurs in the train. And the young Arnie Hammer, who plays the Lone Ranger to be, is on the plane, and he's sitting there all dressed up in a beautiful suit, and he's sitting opposite a woman dressed in a typical, 1869 outfit, black outfit. And it turns out this is a religious group, and they're singing and so on. And she says to him, she says, "Would you like to pray with us?" She says, "We're Presbyterian." Now, if you were to ask me the last time I've seen a movie where somebody says, "Would you like to pray with us? We're Presbyterian," I would have to say the answer is 0. And if you were to ask me the last time I've had the privilege to lecture about anything in a Presbyterian church, the answer is, this is the first time. So I just want to honor the moment and thank the universe for arranging these kinds of things. Okay. I'm wearing a scientist hat, and normally what I do is I have these pretty PowerPoint presentations with lots of graphs, and it's very organized and so on. But as you know, the God said that we're not supposed to use PowerPoint today. And if I don't have PowerPoint, of course, then I've at least got a written script. I would be prepared, like you were prepared, but we don't have that either. So I'm going to be like Paul was. I'm going to share with you certain information that I knew I wanted to share, but I'm also going to be spontaneous. And that means we also have to make sure that I watch the time so I stay within a reasonable time. I'm a scientist, first and foremost a scientist. I always say that I'm a boring scientist because I really stick with data, follow data. I was brought up in essentially an atheist home in an all-Christian community. In fact, I had the privilege of sitting next to Patty and confessed with her that in the town I grew up, half of it was Italian. I used to go to Catholic church with my Italian girlfriends. Wonderful. I had no idea what was going on because it was all Latin in those days, which I adored because I could then really experience the love and the caring of what went on. But as my writing partner once described me, he said, Gary, he said, the best way to describe you is that you were raised to be an orthodox agnostic. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is, whether the question is there gravity or is there God? My response, this is my philosophy, is I don't know, could be yes, could be no, show me the data, I'm open. Now, the upside of that philosophy of life, as I've discovered over the years at Harvard and Yale and the University of Arizona, is it actually makes for a good scientist. And the reason is because you're not attached to any beliefs. You're not committed to any theories. And what you want to do is discover, quote, the truth. So what you do is you honor any and all hypotheses. people come to me with their beliefs. They'll tell me that, for example, I heard a thing that you have to wait till you're 38 before you recover from get over your past life so you can then go on to your current life. I heard a statement like that. I don't know if it's true or not. But what I will do is I'll put it on the table. I give all hypotheses, whether I was raised to believe them or not, whether they're weird or not. I give them the possibility of shining. And then it's up to the data to see which ones best account for life and have practical consequences for what we can observe and measure. So the upside is I end up getting involved with all kinds of things that are contrary to the way I was educated, which was a firm materialistic perspective. The downside is personal. Because the question is, when do you have enough data to make a decision? When are you allowed to finally say, I believe? So what happens is, for me, it takes an awful amount of data before I'm willing to accept it at a personal level. To go from theory to conclusion. And what's happened now, at this particular stage, and having done this work now for almost 15 years, is I've been forced by the evidence to the conclusion that there is a greater spirituality, that there is what we call, quote, life after death, that the universe is much more interesting than almost any of us can imagine, and that we are on a path as a species right now to awakening to this in ways that has been foreseen by many people, but is unknown to most of us, certainly myself. And in the process, we may even discover some things that even the greatest mystics haven't seen yet themselves, because this is part of the journey. Now, what I'd like to do is to share with you sort of I have a diagram of this, but it's sort of easy to show, so a lot of we can do it with our own hands. Sort of 5 criteria that I've come to conclude, if all 5 of them are present, that under those circumstances, those specific circumstances, logic dictates that we hold a belief to be true. That if all 5 of them are present, it's our responsibility, our ethical and moral responsibility, to conclude that something is probably true, even if we don't like it, even if it goes against our beliefs. And I'll take you through these quickly, and I'll give you examples of evidence of each one. The first is scientific theory and logic. One of the ways that we come to a conclusion is if logic takes us there, and if theory takes us there. Okay? And in this particular area, although according to some skeptics, they'll make these, forgive me for saying this, but preposterous statements that there's no scientific theory that could explain any of this. That's just patently wrong. That's patently false. And there's very easy ways for us to understand this as lay people. So let me give you an example. If we go into the dark at night, we're out in the country, away from the city lights, and there's no full moon, and there are no clouds. We can see hundreds of thousands of stars with the naked eye. How many of you have ever done that? Been out in the country and seen this display of stars? Isn't it fantastic? It's just amazing. With telescopes now, we can see billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars. And all that light has been traveling for millions or billions of years in the vacuum of space, and it's all there. Everywhere you look, there are billions of stars, trillions of stars, in every direction. And all that light is crisscrossing in what we call, quote, the vacuum of space. And it doesn't get mixed up. If it did, if it degraded in the vacuum of space, when you and I looked at the sky at night, we would see mush. We don't see mush. We see a history of starlight that goes back billions of years. That's why we can have astronomy. That's why we can have astrophysics. Both logic and physics tells us that light has a kind of immortality. Light has a kind of immortality in terms of the storage of information and energy. That's not controversial. It's only controversial when you think about it, where the thinking takes you. Now, we could spend hours just talking about the theory and logic that leads us there. However, during the day, of course, when we look up at the sky and there's no clouds, it's blue, right? You see it right now. The question is, what happened to all that starlight? And all the thousands of stars you can see with the naked eye. And the trillions of stars we can see with telescopes. Has it all disappeared? Or is it all still there? It's just that we can't see it because we're blinded by the brightness of the closest star in our vicinity, which we call the sun. Well, that is the explanation. In fact, that's why we can't see most of the stars when we're in Santa Monica or LA, because the city lights are interfering with us seeing this dim light. So the take-home message, the soundbite that occurred to me many years ago when I was a professor at Yale. I was one of the youngest tenured professors at Yale. I actually did my PhD at Harvard. I'm just correcting a couple of facts.
Thank you.
Is that sometimes we need to go into the dark in order to see the light. Sometimes we need to go into the dark in order to see the light. And that's why we learn to meditate. And that's why we learn to go into quiet spaces. And that's why at 4 o'clock in the morning, or 3 o'clock in the morning, we can be at times where we can be most receptive. So logic and theory points to the possibility that light has a kind of immortality. And by the way, we don't have time to go into this. You know, if you and I stand out during the night sky, and we're looking up at the stars, you know what's happening with the light that's reflected off our bodies? It's going into space, too. And we know that that's a fact now, because if we put spy satellites out into space, what do? They easily see us walking on the sandy beach or wherever we are. And our light is like light from distant stars. It keeps going and going, too. Our light is constantly expanding out into the vacuum of space. And it's not just our reflected light, but it's all of our emitted light, the infrared, the ultraviolet, and all of the frequencies that comprise our physical bodies. There's a history of our physicality, even, that continues in the, quote, vacuum of space. So if we're looking for any kind of evidence and theory that would say our energy and information can continue, science allows it. So that's finger number one. Finger number two is actual scientific research. So if theory and logic predict something, and scientific evidence supports it, well, it's better than either one alone. And there is a voluminous amount of research literature that is consistent with this hypothesis, spreading across many different areas, including near-death experiences and reincarnation research, stuff done at the University of Virginia and a few other places. Controlled mediumship research, particularly from my laboratory, but from other laboratories, been replicated in other parts of the world. And now with contemporary technology, which is what I'm going to focus on most in this presentation, the combination of all that evidence all points to the idea that our consciousness continues. I've published 3 books in the area of using mediums to investigating whether any mediums are real, and if so, can we interpret this as them really being in connection with spirit? And the conclusion I've been forced to by the data is that, no question about it, some mediums are real. Yes, there are frauds, and yes, there are cold readers. In fact, sidebar, when I first started this work, I knew about the fakes, and I didn't want to be fooled. I'm from New York. So what I did was I realized, I decided if you can't beat them, join them. So what I did was I became a fake medium. I purchased and read secret books about how to be a fake medium. I took a course in how to be a fake medium. I'm a pretty good fake medium. So consequently, I could design research that would eliminate the tricks of the trade. And therefore, only the real ones would be able to do the nature of the work. And let me just briefly take you through one kind of experiment, one of the most recent experiments, to show you how sophisticated this experimental research is done. It uses what's called a triple-blind procedure. Now let me explain what I mean by that. The gold standard in biomedical research, as Ken will confirm, or is Dr. Party here?
Yes.
He will confirm too, is what's called the double-blind experiment. So let's say Ken was going to be a participant. Is Ken? Okay, I forgot your last name, so I'll go by first name. Is that all right? I can call you Dr. Ken?
Works.
What?
That works.
Okay, Dr. Ken. Let's say Dr. Ken is participating in an experiment. He would sign a consent form, which would inform him that he was participating in research and that he knew he'd be receiving either an active medication or a placebo. And he would know it would be one of those two. And he would agree to take this and then fill out the forms and have blood work done or whatever needed to be done to be tested. So he's blind. Number two is the provider is blind. So let's say Dr. Gary is giving you the medication. By the way, I couldn't do that because I'm not officially, because I'm a PhD and an MD. But if I could, or I was in this role in this study, I'd be kept blind too. So I wouldn't know if it was a placebo or an active medication. So I couldn't influence Dr. Ken in terms of the outcome. He's blind, I'm blind. Double blind. You with me so far? I'm supposed to say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So why did we need it to be triple blind? Well, because in most mediumship research, including the research that I conducted, the sitters, the people who wished to hear from their deceased loved ones, were always present when the reading took place. The sitters were not blind. You knew when the medium was trying to contact your loved ones. So when you're scoring the data, we can't be 100% sure that you're not being biased by your knowledge that it's you. So the question is, how do we make the sitter be blind? Answer: we don't let them be present at their own reading. You say, what? You can't be present when your loved ones are being read? That's correct. We use what's called a proxy sitter experimenter. In this case, that was actually a proxy experimenter. We would have a separate experimenter who would stand in for you. So let's say the two of you, who I presume you don't know each other, is that correct? Oh, you do know each other. Well, make believe you don't. Because in the research, that's what we do. We'd have two people who would volunteer to participate in this experiment. They're people who wish to hear from specific deceased persons, formerly physical people, I prefer to say, who they dearly loved. And you knew that you would not actually be present when the readings took place. You would be told what night the readings were going to be held. So you could, in your own mind, invite your loved ones to be present. But you'd not be able to be there when the reading actually took place. Let's say you wanted to hear from somebody called Bob and you wanted to hear from somebody called John. Okay? You would give those names to an experimenter who would then give them to a second experimenter. And the only thing that they knew was Bob and John. The second experiment would now call the medium. So let's say that this woman over here, I will say Patty. This is good because Patty is a medium. So, and let's say that I'm the proxy experimenter in this case. So I'd say, okay, Patty, we're going to be doing this experiment. This is a real experiment, by the way. And we're doing it long distance, so it saves everybody time, money, and so on. And I say, okay, Patty, just as we discussed before, we're going to be doing a reading, and I'm going to give you the names of certain people. So I'll say, okay, Patty, for the next 10 minutes, could you please give me any information you can about a deceased person named Bob? How many deceased Bobs are there? There's a lot, right? But not enough so that you would know which Bob, and it would certainly allow Patty to distinguish between a Bob and a John. And then she would get whatever she would get. Now, I, as the experimenter, I can't give her any cues about whether she's accurate or not, because I don't know anything about Bob. Then I would ask her specific generic questions, such as, what did Bob look like? How did Bob die? What did Bob do in life? What were his hobbies? The kinds of information that will allow you to identify Bob. Then when we're done, we say, okay, now we're going to go on to person number 2. Okay, now what I'd like to do is I'd like you to, Patty, try for the next 10 minutes, get whatever information you can from somebody named John. How many deceased Johns are there? Also a lot. However, John is different than Bob. So then I ask the same questions. What did John look like? How did John die? What was John's, what did he do in life? What were John's hobbies? Enough so that you could identify John. So now what we do is we then have those readings transcribed. Now we have 2 sets of readings, A and B. Each of you are separately mailed the 2 readings. You get A and B, and you get A and B. You're each told that one of them is your reading, and the other is a reading for somebody else. But you're not told which is which. Now you have to score each item from reading A and from reading B in terms of the degree to which it fits Bob in your case and John in another. And then when you're all done, you have to guess. Now, which was your reading? Triple blind. Medium's blind, the experimental's blind, and the sitter's blind. What happens? We get results. And again, I have these beautiful graphs and so on. There were 8 research mediums in this experiment. When I looked at the performance of individual mediums, 3 of them were like extraordinary. 2 of them did really well. 1 was clearly above average, and 2 were at quote chance. There were no reversals, meaning if it was just chance data, 50% of the time you would have gotten the reverse readings. It was anything but chance. So what's the conclusion that I've come to? Some mediums are real. You can do this research even under triple blind conditions. My former postdoctoral fellow has recently completed a study where she did a quintuple blind experiment. Added some more blind levels and it doesn't change the results. So scientific data is consistent with the hypothesis. I will get to the technology part in a moment, because that's the most amazing of all. But I want to save that. I just want to go through the other 3 first. The third is if scientific data, theory, and logic support this, and scientific data support it. And this is the third one. We know people who are highly successful who also believe that this is true. See, my problem is that I hear this stuff and I do the science and everything else, but I still think it's crazy. And I said, well, there must be something wrong with me believing this. But when I meet people who are really smart, who are really successful, who fit the criteria of what I call the 7 S's. And the 7 S's are people who meet the criteria of being smart, successful, skeptical, as in questioning. And by the way, the reason why I've spent time with both of these gentlemen, Paul Davids and Rich Martini, is because they have to be also skeptical. They're smart, they're successful, they're skeptical. They're also sophisticated. They're not simpleton thinkers. These guys are, they really try to think about things closely. They are savvy. And what I mean by savvy, and I pick all S's, you see. What I mean by savvy, it's the only way I can remember it. The reason what I mean by savvy is that they're knowledgeable. They've been around the block. They've got reason to have discernment. 6, they're sane. Meaning, and I was trained in clinical psychology. So I'm always looking for neurosis and psychosis and panic attacks, and, the standard labels. And they don't show the criteria of being anything that sounds insane. And finally, they're straight. And what I mean by straight is they've got integrity. They're truth seekers. They really want to know what's happening. They're not trying to pull the wool over the public eyes or my eyes. When I meet people like that, who have all 7 criteria, and they believe this cockamamie theory, I say, wow. And what's happened in my own personal life is I've met a slew of these people. I can't dismiss them anymore. It's not just crazy Gary. It's crazy Paul and crazy Rich and crazy other people as well. That's the third. And then 4th, you have personal experience, direct personal experience. Because very often people have the first 3. There's the logic and theory, there's experimental evidence, you know people that you can trust, who are really successful, who also hold these beliefs, but we don't have any direct personal experience. Most of us don't have it in this field. Certainly not, but I have. I've had so much personal experience, we can spend hours just sharing some of this. I'll share 2 brief examples, one very personal and one through a medium. First of all, I've had the privilege to work with what I call the Michael Jordans in the mediumship world. The people that you know of, people like John Edward and Mario Chino and James on Prague and so on and so forth. And I've had the privilege to work with them under controlled conditions, but also under private conditions. Private conditions, where I've seen them do readings on other people and even do readings on me. And I've witnessed things that they've just been extraordinary. And I'm going to leave that aside, because again, they're wonderful stories, but we've heard those stories. You could just trust me when you're doing this now for 15 years, and I've written about many of these, and that's some of the salient ones in 3 of these books, if you're interested. But then there's also direct personal experience, and since you happened to mention this, I will share this. It was actually before I was starting graduate school. I was just finishing my undergraduate school, and I was in New York City. Patty knows it well. And I was on the East River Drive, going south, so I've been told, because I have no memory for this. And I was driving in a little Opel Kadett. I don't know if any of you remember what an Opel Kadett was, but they had no frame. They're really cute little cars. It was a sweetie little car. This is 1966, and it had no frame. And of course, nobody wore seatbelts, and there were no shoulder straps. And apparently it was raining. And my then young wife, my first wife, was in the car, and she was frightened. So she tells me. And so she asked me if I'd pull off the road. Apparently I said yes. And so I did pull off. And there was a car in front of blocking the exit, and it had stalled. And so we were sitting in front of this car. And so we were just off the exit, but not off the street. And then, and I remember this clear as if it happened yesterday, I heard a voice. And the voice said, "Put your seatbelt on." I didn't understand. I never wore a seatbelt. Nobody wore seatbelts in those days. I didn't know how to put it on. But I also never heard a voice before. For some reason, I listened. So I finagled with the seat, and I figured out how to put mine on first. And then what I did was I put it on my wife. And about a minute later, we were hit by a car going 55 miles an hour, Mustang. And our car was sandwiched. It was totally destroyed. The trunk was literally the back seat. My wife, Jeannie, her seat was literally ripped out of the car, but because she was wearing her seatbelt, she stayed in the car, but she was wrapped around the seatbelt. When I awoke in the hospital the next morning, I was told that I'd been in a serious car accident, that my wife was down the hall with a very serious back injury, and I didn't know I was married. I had lost memory for a good 2+ years of my life. I knew who she was. I know we were engaged, but I didn't know that we had been married and so on. And over the course of about a week, a lot of my memory returned, except for 24 hours around the accident. But the only thing I do remember, clear as day, was that voice. I received what was called an occipital concussion, meaning I hit the back of my head on the post, which is what gave me what's called retrograde amnesia. The question was not just, why did I hear or how did I hear that voice? I was aware then that something magical had happened, but I didn't take it seriously. I didn't integrate it. I didn't allow myself to think about it. I just thought it was odd. It was only about 10 years ago, thanks to a student of mine at the University of Arizona, as he asked a more important question. Not just that you had a voice and you listened to it, but how come you weren't killed? How come the steering wheel didn't go off didn't break through your chest? How come you only had a couple of little bruises and a little bump on your head? How did that happen? Is there a bigger picture? Is there a bigger perspective I needed to have considered? I wasn't aware of it then. So when you look back on your life and you see that there are very salient moments in your life which also are speaking to the things that you're witnessing in the laboratory and with other people and so on, it's hard. You got to include that in your experience. And finally, number 5, and this is the important one here. If all four of those are present, and there is no good reason to reject them, there's no good reason to dismiss the first four, meaning that sure you could, speculate about, well, is the theory of the continuity of light wrong? I mean, we could question that theory, but it's kind of improbable. Is there a reason to reject the totality of the experimental evidence? No, not really. Is there good reason to question the sanity or the integrity of these people that you know? Number three, no, these people are, by any people's standards, are people that we admire, we want to be like. Is there good reason to reject your own personal experience? Were you an unreliable observer? Were you a biased observer? Not the totality of experience that I've had. When there's no good reason to reject it, when you put on the skeptic's hat, what are you left with? I can't think of anything else. I realize under those special circumstances, we do not have an excuse to disbelieve. And that's where I am. So it's with that background, I now want to take you to technology. And I want to take you to our latest work. And I want to ask you a couple of questions, which I would love your opinions about. And it relates to our latest work. And I want to get back to that beginning of, sometimes you need to go into the dark in order to see the light. There are some people who literally see spirit. They don't just hear them, they see them. And I've worked with multiple mediums. I won't use any names right now. They're very well known to people in this field who tell me that they've seen, for example, my adopted grandmother, Susie Smith, the author of 30 books in the field of parapsychology and life after death, and she was sitting in my office chair, in my office, okay? I don't see nothing. I don't see, I don't hear. One of my colleagues recently referred to me as the Helen Keller of afterlife research. So I don't see, but I don't discount the fact that other people can see. Some people can see. I don't know whether Patty ever sees, but sometimes they do. It turns out that Rhonda, who's here over the past 7 years, I don't think there's any reason to hide it, she has developed the capacity to see. And just as I think it was somebody who talked about monkey mind, was that you, Rich? Yeah. That's the phrase that Rhonda uses. It always says, we assume it's her monkey mind until proven otherwise. In other words, we assume it's her imagination until we have reason to believe that she's seeing something more than just what she's imagining. And we have a lot of data that it's more than monkey mind. The question is, what's she seeing? What does Patty see? Is it really light? Well, when I've interviewed now, I've worked with probably close to 30 extraordinary gifted mediums over the past 15 years. To a T, they all tell me that what they do in one form or another is they connect with the energy of spirit. Not just information, but the energy of spirit. And I was trained and started out as an electrical engineer to have a background in all of this. And I began to wonder, what would happen if we could use exquisitely sensitive equipment? And sometimes you need to go into the dark in order to see the light. What would happen if we created a pitch black environment? And then we invited specific spirits, discarnate entities. I really dislike that word. I think it's very disrespectful. I don't refer to you people as incarnate entities. So why do I want to call them discarnate entities? We sometimes affectionately refer to them as our departed hypothesized co-investigators. Because they are really collaborators. If we invite Susie Smith, this woman I talked about, or Marcia Eklund, who was Rhonda's mother, or since you mentioned Harry Houdini, okay, because of George Hal, somebody like Harry Houdini, and others, into a chamber where we have super sensitive, exquisite devices for detecting single photons of light in pitch black. And And some of the research we used was called the silicon photomultiplier system. A single detector costs $2,500. They're used in biomedical imaging equipment. This is not ghost hunter toys. This is real equipment under tightly controlled conditions with lots of baseline data, so we know what the noise of the environment is compared to when we invite specific spirits. And I have all these pretty graphs, you just imagine. But we started doing these kinds of experiments, and much to my amazement, and of course happiness, we got positive results. We did it over and over. And also, one of the immediate questions when we started doing this work was, how do we know it's not the mind of the experimenter? Because it was always a human being physically present, running the equipment. So one of the things I did was I said, okay, what would happen if we asked the experimenter to attempt to put his mind into the box? Could he replicate with his own mind what was happening when he was inviting spirit in? Couldn't do it. Eventually submitted this to a journal that is a peer-reviewed journal, actually does blinded reviews, so the author's name and affiliation is not listed when the paper goes out. It went out to 4 reviewers, critically reviewed, and it ultimately passed muster. There were 3 sets of experiments, and it was published in 2010. But the reviewers, the major concern about the reviewers was, yeah, how do we know it's not somehow related to the energy and consciousness of experimenters? And I said, there's only one solution. You've got to get rid of the human beings in the experiment. How do we do that? How many of you have a cell phone? Most of you, right? It is true that you don't have to be present for your cell phone to pick up a call, right? You can leave it in your room, or even turn the ringer off. And you don't even know what's happening, and it'll pick up the call whether you're there or not. And later you could download your messages, right? You're supposed to say, yes, that's how cell phones work, right? Okay. So I reasoned, well, if that's the same thing as the case, we should be able to have a computer that with the entire experiment, collecting all the data and all the instructions given on PowerPoint using the voice of the experimenter even. The computer would run the experiment when no human being, physical human being was present, and theoretically you should get the same results. And at that time I had a sizable grant from a private foundation, and I also had a gifted research assistant who was very skilled in computer programming, and I designed the following software. Very, very briefly, it worked as follows. First of all, the experimenter did this experiment that I'm about to tell you, where he actually ran the equipment. So we knew we could get a result. And then what he did was automated it. And here's how it was automated. At 4 o'clock, he would read a prescribed script. And the script would go essentially, Dear Susie, Dear Sophia, those are the first 2, quote, spirits who work in the laboratory. We're going to be running an experiment tonight, just as we've done in the past. So please show up at the lab at 11 o'clock and watch for the instructions on the PowerPoint. I really appreciate your coming. Thank you very much. The computer will collect the data and I'll pick it up in the morning. Okay? He then leaves the laboratory. There's now nobody in the laboratory. At 11 o'clock, the computer comes to life. It awakes. And this was not spirit initiated as far as we know. This was this program. It starts at 11. The camera's all warmed up, and now the computer picks a random number to determine when the experiment will actually begin. So it might begin at 11:15 or 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night. So let's say it's 12 o'clock at night now. Now the PowerPoint comes up. And with WAV files, which is one of the ways you record audio, in the experimenter's voice, it says, Hi Susie, welcome. We're going to be doing the experiment, and it's going to be just like it was before. So for the next 15 minutes, what we're going to do is collect a baseline. So for 15 minutes, please stay with me in the control room. And next room where the camera is, and with the box within a box within a box, the black box environment, it's going to collect baseline data. And then the camera would do this, and go on and save it, and say, okay, Susie, now please go into the box as you did when I was here, in the physical. Please go in the box and sit there for the next 15 minutes and let your light be picked up by the camera. And thank you so much, and I'll tell you when the trial's over. Now it collects 15 minutes. And then you'd say, okay, Susie, thank you very much. We've now got the spirit detection trial coming. Please come back now into the control room with me and wait. We're going to get another 15-minute post-baseline period. So there was a pre and a spirit detection and a post-baseline. Then he'd say, okay, thank you very much. We'll take a break. And then it would say, okay, Sophia, now it's your time. But first we got to collect 15-minute baseline. Then a spirit detection. And then a post-baseline. You got the paradigm? Supposed to say yes?
Yeah.
Good. Just make sure it's still here. Okay. Some of it can be fairly complicated. The computer would determine who came first, Susie or Sophia. Because in our previous research, we find that certain spirits have more effect on this technology than others. There are individual differences in the energy of spirit, which you can then document. So we did this experiment over and over. And then we averaged all the data. If you can see the graphs, it's beautiful, but I'll show you. Here's a pre on the light. Here's during the spirit trial, and there's the post. Just as you predict. You see it both for Susie and Sophia. Moreover, if you do separate trials where there's never a spirit intention period, so everything's the same, except in that middle trial, nobody goes in the box. It's flat. It's pretty good. I didn't believe it, so you know what you do? We replicated it again. We did this experiment and the baseline control. About the same thing. We now submitted it for publication. What else could they say? There was one hypothesis. And I always tell them, because these are super skeptics in the parapsychology community, it's on the table. Here's what a few people actually believe. That even though I'm not running the experiment, and even though I'm sleeping, my mind is going to the laboratory in the middle of the night, watching the instructions, and manipulating the data to fool me and the world into thinking that it's caused by spirit, when in fact it's my unconscious mind. And they consider that to be a more plausible hypothesis than all the data and all the other reasons for doing this work in the first place. Because how could my mind explain all the mediumship effects and all the reincarnation effects and all this other stuff and the light from distant stars? But people who don't want to believe, they're going to grab onto anything as improbable as that. By the way, there is no evidence that anybody's unconscious mind, let alone mine, could do that. Okay? But more importantly, if it could, I would either drop my mind or quit science altogether. Because at some point you have to stop. So let's give this work the benefit of the doubt. Now we're getting to the concluding remarks. And by the way, how much time do I have, Rich, so I make sure that I do this with
If you want to do a little Q&A, we begin in 5 minutes.
Okay. Can I go 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, I'll go 10 minutes, but there'll be Q&A in part of this, and then we'll open the general Q&A this time. I want you to imagine that the technology that we're working on, and we are now working on this full time, has reached a point where we have the evolution of what I refer to as from the cell phone to the smartphone to what I call the soul phone. That there's a piece of technology where you can dial your loved one, quote, on the other side, in the greater beyond, whatever word you want to use. And they, who have access to this technology, their version of this technology, and this is all worked out, can just like us choose to screen their calls and answer or not. So you don't have to worry about bothering them. You can't bother them anymore with the technology than we can bother each other in this plane. So they don't have to be there, they don't have to pick it up. It's their choice just as it is our choice. And this equipment is as reliable as our own technology. I want you to imagine that this is possible. What would this mean for our society if we knew 100% true, 100% true, or at least 99.999%, that not only we can connect with our loved ones if they want to connect with us, but we can also call other people, including David Bowman, Albert Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, whoever you want to pick. And if they're available and they wish, they can choose to communicate with us. Particularly if they happen to have a love and passion for humanity, then they happen to have a love and passion for our planet. Because as you know, more and more people are not just caring about their local, their most immediate biological family. Their love is much broader. They had this experience of the pool of love, the pool of one. They were like that when they were here. Okay? And it's only grown since they have transitioned. So this technology exists. What would it mean? And do they have rights like we do? And do we have a responsibility to honor them? And in this new book I'm writing, which is called The Soul Phone Revolution, that's the working title, understanding the greatest transformation in human history. And I mean that without exaggeration. There is virtually no aspect of human activity that is not touched or directly or indirectly, including the legal system, if this technology comes into existence. So for example, imagine the following, and I have a bunch of what ifs. The last half of the book is what if. The first half is why, and it gives the 5 reasons, and I lay out all the details. And the second is what if we have this technology, now what would it mean? So let me give you an example, hypothetical example. And the book starts this way. It says, imagine that Albert Einstein and a team of people on the other side has been working on technology to improve non-polluting energy source. It's some sort of solar technology. And he's worked on this very carefully, in collaboration with people here. Remember, he's on Skype all the time now. He's texting. We got the soul phone. It's here. Okay? And he works with engineers here, and they take his theory, as he instructs them to build it, and they build it, and it works. So we now know this technology works. Einstein then decides that he wishes to submit a patent for his invention. Remember, this came from him. So with a patent attorney, maybe both there and here, he submits a formal patent. Now, if he had been on the earth, there would have been no question that he deserves this patent. But because he did it, quote, from the, quote, other side, the question is, if a patent is submitted, and it's a responsible patent for something that really works, and the IP clearly comes from the other side, and you can document it, you've got proof of this, should the FDA give him a patent? If he's awarded a patent, should he, just like any other inventor, have a say in how this is marketed? Should he have some controlling interest in the deployment and the ethical and responsible manifestation of this technology? Question. Or, and he gets a license fee, he and his colleagues. It's their invention. Shouldn't they be able to set up a bank account? I mean, I can now do my Bank of America stuff on my iPhone, so he can use it on his cell phone. Shouldn't he be able to have an account? And he shouldn't, if he wants, be able to give some of this money to his kids or his grandkids, or give it to some favorite charities, and also pay taxes on it to help reduce the debt. Should he have that possibility? What if he's an entertainer or a musician, and he writes music on the other side, or writes a book? Should he have copyright laws? Do they extend to the other side? So there's this whole issue of intellectual property. And I realize there are huge questions about this. I just want to plant the seeds here. I'll give you another one since we talked about death and hospice and so on. And this example I actually use partly because of my own parents. It's not, but the story I use is, I have a picture of my parents there. Nobody knows this unless I tell them. And I've already started lecturing publicly about this for the past couple of months. Imagine the following. There's a couple that have been married for, let's say, 50 years. They really love each other. And then the husband gets sick and dies. And of course, remember, everybody's got a cell phone now. Big business. And so she, just like she would be in contact with him every day when he was here, she now continues to be in contact because they Skype every day. They're in contact. Now she comes down with cancer, a serious form of cancer. And she's going to be dying in a few months. But of course, the medical community, what do they want to do? They want to do everything they can to try to keep her alive. Okay? And meanwhile, she's in a lot of pain, and they don't want to give her pain medication, of course, with the concern she's getting addicted. And they want to do all these expensive treatments to try to keep her alive. Meanwhile, she doesn't want to spend all the money. She's got a limited inheritance. And she and her husband clearly want their inheritance to go to the kids and the grandkids, not to her. poor quality of life medical care. So she makes the decision, the reasoned decision, that she wants to join her husband. Should she have the right to do that? Should she have the right, like she did euthanasia for his dogs, cats, couldn't she have a right to do this for herself? And if so, shouldn't we eventually create a team, in the book I call them compassionate transition providers, of people who are trained to do this in a sacred manner, in as pain-free as possible. Whose choice is it? Because we know there's no death. There's merely transition to the next level. I'll give you one more quick example. More innocent. Young man, boy in his early 20s, walking home, is approached by a man with a gun who does the police work, whatever they call it, security for his neighborhood. And an altercation occurs, and the young man is killed. And the question is the man who killed him responsible for his death? And there are laws, such as in Florida, because I drew this from that case. And the testimony is really not clear about, for example, who was screaming on the tape. The mother of the young man who was killed was convinced that it was her son. The mother of the person who killed this boy, convinced it was her son. There's conflicting testimony. And the one other person who was there when it happened, of course, he's dead, so he can't participate in his trial. But now we've got the cell phone. We now accept Skype testimony. Shouldn't he be allowed to testify in his own trial? Should he have the right? Should victims of crimes, if they're killed, be allowed to testify? Should juries be given the instruction to take this testimony just like they would any testimony from anybody, victim, living or deceased, living or transitioned, to be examined and cross-examined so that you weigh the totality of the evidence? Or even one step further, you want to get really interesting here. A lot of people on the other side have a lot of free time. And they really like to be of service to humanity, and we know that juries are really expensive and so on and so forth. So they decide they'd like to assist in jury duty, especially when people have to be sequestered and everything else. So couldn't at least some people on the jury be doing so by Skype, with the S phone? These and so many other questions get raised once we start taking this work seriously. So I want to leave you with just this last thought. And that's what I call the Wright brothers moment. A little over 110 years ago, there were no airplanes. We human beings did not know if we could fly. I was the one who was talking about thinking that she could fly. Was that you? I was one of those kids too, but I didn't jump off roofs. I wasn't brave enough. And many people had tried and failed. But on one fateful day, in December 1903, 5 people witnessed the Wright brothers. Okay? There were 4 flights that day. The first one lasted 12 seconds. The longest one lasted 59 seconds. That was it. The second time they tried to do this, failed, because it required a minimum breeze, and there wasn't enough breeze to get to the planet. It didn't replicate, in other words. The third time, it worked. And although the photographs were taken and pictures were reported in the newspaper, it took a couple of years before the public finally came to realize and believe that flight was possible. But for the 5 people who were there that day, they witnessed it. They all knew that flight was possible. So I want to do a quick thought experiment, Einstein experiment. It's 1903, December. We're all at Kitty Hawk. No fancy lights, no beautiful lights here, no microphones, none of this stuff here. It's just 1903. Could we have imagined then that in a few short generations there'd be these gigantic machines carrying hundreds of people, traveling many hundreds of miles an hour, flying around the world 24/7. Could we have imagined last year over 74 million people flew and flew safely? Could we have imagined that it would reach a point where literally every second, every time our heart beats, somewhere in the world, a plane is taking off or landing? Every second. Could we have imagined that there'd be a brief window of time where you could get a good meal on a plane? Could we have imagined that radio would be invented, and then television, and then DVDs, and then noise-canceling headphones, and then iPhones and iPads and so on, and finally the World Wide Web would be invented, and then all of this would become available, and most amazingly, that all of us would take all of this for granted. That's, to me, the most amazing. Well, I don't know about you, but if I was there in 1903, I couldn't have seen all this. And yet it was there. The potential was there. Well, I think we're experiencing another Wright Brothers moment right now. This is part of the reason I asked that question about what's now special. Because I think science is also is advancing as well. There's time going by quickly. And not only are more and more people having more and more experiences, but science is catching up too. And I think that we may be having another Wright Brothers moment. And my question is, not just what can the cell phone become? Can we envision the possibility of this technology being here? But can we imagine the day where everyone takes all of this for granted? It's no longer the same world. It's that transformative. And all of this is driven by love. And the question is, who's going to bring this good news? As someone recently said to me, or as your friend said yesterday, it's a wonderful life. He had this experience that there's a wonderful life. How is this rebirth of hope going to occur? Well, it's going to occur because people like Rich bring us together. It's going to occur because he and Paul do documentaries on this, and they continue to move forward. It's going to occur because of the speakers that we heard this morning, and will continue here this afternoon, are making sacrifices in their personal lives to help bring this message through. And I, for one, feel a super privilege to be part of the journey. And if this information helps provide you with a reason to hope, a reason to believe, a reason to move forward, then I feel that it's been quite the journey. Thank you.
All right. Any questions for Dr. Schwartz? Anybody have any questions? Go ahead. Cheryl.
Is it not possible that someone who had a particular passion on earth, like an Edgar Allan Poe with his poetry, is not on the other side aware of someone's interest and influences them through inspiration, and that they still impact poetry, they just aren't getting royalties for it?
Yes, I think that that is extraordinarily plausible based on all the things that we've talked about. And if we actually look for it, we'll find evidence to that effect. And I'm not saying that necessarily Edgar Allan Poe or anybody else wants to get, fees for their inventions or their activities. The question is, do they have a right to request it? If they are bringing something good to the world, shouldn't they have some say in the resources that they bring to the world of how their goodness is distributed? And I, for one, have come to the conclusion that if you and I have this right while we're here, this right continues after we transition. Yes?
To be the fly in the ointment, we have always will have the question with the cell phone whether the person who identifies himself as Thomas Edison is actually Thomas Edison or somebody posing as him. We have a tradition among the living that if you want your testimony taken, you go to a notary public and you put your thumbprint down and you swear that it's you and you swear to the statement, then you get paid. The same thing with the Social Security office. They want to see identification for you to prove who you are. Those on the other side can't conform to our norms
Let me
in
make
order
this
to
in-
make those legal
Well,
claims.
My friendly fly in the ointment,
Yeah.
if you don't think that I haven't pondered this question, you don't know me very well. Yes, part of the issue is how do you establish identification with contemporary technology? And just for the record, there are many ways that we can improve the verification of an individual where the probability is very great that it's not somebody posing as Thomas Edison or anybody else. And number two, you've just triggered a thought, and I think on that we should let this conversation continue. As you know, iPhone has just come out with a thumbprint identification system, and you know that now it's immediately been cracked. Because thumbprints don't really work all that well because anybody can make a fingerprint surreptitiously of your phone and then have a plastic imprint made and then they put it on the thing. And so none of these things ultimately really work. It's always some degree of inference. But the funny thing is if the general theory, the electromagnetic theory of information and energy is correct, that all this information is, quote, stored in, quote, the vacuum of space, which is so full of information, it's incomprehensible. Talk about an infinite storage device. But theoretically, your thumbprints are out there also. And for all we know, that we have to imagine the possibility that whatever we can do here, we can do there as well. Now, it won't eliminate people stealing your thumbprints on the other side, but the same problem applies here. So we'll just set similar standards.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Great work.